So in 2017, I was lucky enough to go down to France and Belgium to check out some of the World War I battlefields. Now, I know there's a lot of people on the channel and who play Verdun who are interested in the historical aspects of World War I. So I think this video might help you and give you more of an insight into what I saw personally when I went down there. So on day one, we got the ferry over into France and we were heading to a town called Ypres, which was in Belgium. But firstly, we stopped at an old medical station on the way, which actually had a war grave very close by. One of the main attractions in the war grave was a soldier called Private Strudwick, who was only 15 years old when he joined and died in the battlefield when he was 15 years old. Shortly after this, we arrived at Ypres, which was a small town on the Belgian border with France. And it was a really nice town. It had a modern feel, but with historic buildings, if that makes sense. And the reason that seemed that way is because, according to the tour guide we were with at the time, Ypres was completely flattened as it was part of the Flanders battlefield. The Germans completely destroyed the town and it got rebuilt shortly after World War I, and it was all paid for by the German government. It was a really interesting town, very nice and great people. Ypres is also the home of the Menin Gate, which is a Commonwealth memorial which has thousands upon thousands of names inside, and I've got a short video here which you'll see just shows you the inside of what it looks like. So this picture here, this is what Ypres used to look like. This is pre-World War I. This is some Commonwealth soldiers marching to the battlefield. Now that was all flattened completely. So the pictures that you saw previously, which I took in Ypres with the Flanders Field Museum, which you saw at the start, that was all rebuilt, and that's what I was sort of getting at before. But that was a picture pre-World War I. So day two, we went south of Ypres and went back into France, and we went to these old Commonwealth underground mines and tunnels which led to different trenches and to the German lines, and they had spray paint on the walls, such as this one, Bat HQ. And they'd been there since World War I. It was a great place. It was quite eerie down there, but it was a great experience. It's probably one of the best places to go. But yeah, it was really interesting, that one. Later that day, we went to the Somme battlefield and we saw a graveyard for the Devonshire Regiment soldiers. Now, there was an interesting story with a corporal and his squire who ran across the battlefield when they were doing an attack on a German trench. And it was quite a long way. It was up another side of the hill, so one side of a hill to another. And the corporal got shot in the neck, and his squire, with great bravery, tried to save him. And he was also found dead next to his corporal, with bandages. So he obviously died trying to help his corporal, which shows the loyalty the British soldiers had, and some of the other soldiers within World War I, and it shows how hard it was. And that was a real eye-opener because of how I didn't realise quite how far the soldiers had to run to get to another trench. It was quite an interesting experience, that one. We also got to go see this huge explosion site, and you've probably seen it on World War I films before, where a huge chunk of the ground just rises in the air from like a TNT explosion from underneath. And what it was is British soldiers packing a tunnel underneath a German trench full of TNT and then blowing the whole trench up. And it was interesting to see how much TNT they packed in there. And the hole is huge. It's a huge crater, something like a meteor would create. It was really amazing, and it shows how much they put in them tunnels to try and neutralise the trenches. So still remaining on the Somme, we went to another memorial which held French and Commonwealth soldiers this time, and it was the first time I had saw French headstones and graves, and it was interesting seeing the differences between the two sort of memorials and how the Commonwealth Commission has kept out the British and Commonwealths compared to the French, whose aren't as nice and haven't been looked after as well as ours, which is a bit of a shame, but as long as they've got something, that's the main thing. But it was still interesting to see the differences in that. In the final part of the day, we got to go to a Canadian-owned battlefield, which the Canadian government sends people out every year. It sends students out every year to look after and be tour guides. And it was probably the most interesting battlefield I went to, and it gave me a huge amount of respect for the Canadians, because it was here I learned that they were the most feared troops to the Germans. The Germans feared the Canadians more than anyone, just because of the ruthlessness and fearlessness in the battlefield. As it goes for the area itself, it was amazing. You actually got to walk through the trenches. They had been untouched since the end of the war, so no one else had been on them. They haven't planted over them. It's been kept completely clean. And it was also a battlefield for both Welsh and Scottish troops, and there's a really nice Scottish memorial there, and there's some really interesting stories there, which I don't have too much time to go into now, but maybe in a video another day I'll go into that story as a whole, as it's quite a big one. But if you're on about going down, this is probably one of the main attractions to see. It's really amazing. Day 3, we saw a grave to a nurse called Spindler, and she served under British command, and she was killed by shrapnel from a German air barrage, where she was known for helping soldiers wounded in the battlefield. This graveyard was especially interesting because there was US soldiers and Chinese soldiers, French, Jewish, and it was interesting to see that sort of how diverse it was and where people came from. It was really interesting. McGee was an Australian infantry soldier who was awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions within the war, and his headstone is marked with a Victoria Cross, and he's got some poppies there, and it was really interesting to see. I hadn't seen one yet. This is the first time I saw this in the 2 days I'd previously been here, and he was awarded the Victoria Cross for taking out 2 German machine guns single-handedly, and I think these machine guns were killing troops left, right and centre. And he charged them using grenades and a rifle, I think, if I remember correctly. And he managed to take them both out. Really brave guy, really interesting. And obviously a well-deserved military Victoria Cross. So on the very final part of the trip, we went to a German World War I cemetery known as Langermark Cemetery, and it was the most eerie, sinister style place. You know, it was a cold February morning, and it was a really strange place, and it was interesting to see how the German graves are being kept as well. You know, I thought the French were kept badly, but the German ones were even worse. In this German cemetery, each headstone had each headstone had at least more than 10 names on, and there was usually each sort of grave had 10 plus more names on, which meant there was a lot more bodies in here than when you'd think. And there was loads of these sort of square headstones everywhere which were built on the ground. Langermark itself was built on top of old German bunkers which they held through World War One. And the most interesting thing about Langermark was a small square. I should say it's a relatively large square of grass, which you see in this picture here, and this is actually a mass grave of 20,000 German soldiers buried underneath here, and it's a lot of people decided to put the poppies down here just because it seems quite a fitting place, and it seems almost unfair because at the end of the day, these guys were just fighting for their side, and the way they've been buried is not as nice as the Commonwealth, but that's just how things are. And it was definitely one of the more sinister places I've been to. If you plan on going, this is something worth seeing, and it is interesting.